All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about something that completely changed the course of modern history, the Gulf of Tonkin Incident. And look, this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. This is a story, a really crucial one, about how a single narrative, whether it's true or not, can literally start a war.
So let me ask you something. How do you actually start a war? I mean, really think about it. How do you convince millions of people that it's time to send their sons and daughters into a massive, decade-long conflict? What does it take to get that first all-important green light?
Well, the answer is kind of simple and absolutely shocking. You do it with an attack that never happened. Yeah, you heard that right. You start a war with a ghost, a phantom attack, an event that, and this is the crazy part, we now know from the US government's own declassified records, almost certainly did not happen. Okay, so let's really dig into this first part because it's wild. A war started by ghosts? The thing that kicked off America's full-blown involvement in the Vietnam War was a total phantom. So let's start with the official story, the one everyone heard back in August 1964. The news was this: U.S. Navy destroyers out in the Gulf of Tonkin had come under attack by North Vietnamese forces. It was framed as a clear, unprovoked act of aggression, one that, absolutely demanded a strong response. And this is where things get really interesting. Just look at the difference between what Congress was told and what actually happened. On one side, you have this very clear, very dramatic story, an unprovoked and deliberate attack. Sounds pretty serious, right? But then you look at the declassified reality. And what was it? Radar glitches, panicked sailors, a really bad storm. Basically, a whole lot of chaos and confusion, not a coordinated attack. And I really want to be crystal clear here. This is not some fringe conspiracy theory. This quote, "The second attack almost certainly did not occur," comes directly from the government's own files. We're talking declassified documents, audio recordings, internal reports. The very people involved later admitted it. The attack that was used to justify the war was a fiction. Okay, so the big question is, if the attack was a ghost, how in the world was it sold to the public as a real act of war? Let's break down how this non-event somehow became the trigger for a whole decade of fighting. So check out this timeline. Everything happened incredibly fast. Now, to be fair, there was a small actual fight on August 2nd. The USS Maddox got into a skirmish. But that's not the main event. The real tipping point was the supposed second incident on August 4th. And then, get this, just 3 days later, 3 days after that night of chaos and confusion, Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It basically gave the president a blank check to wage war.
So who was pushing this official story? Well, it was the whole shebang. The U.S. government, the Department of Defense over at the Pentagon, and yeah, major media outlets too. They all jumped on it. They took these really confusing, uncertain reports from sailors out at sea and almost overnight turned them into this solid, definitive story of unprovoked aggression.
And this, right here, this is really the heart of it. That messy, uncertain report from a stormy night wasn't treated as a problem that needed figuring out. No, it was treated as an opportunity to be grabbed. It was the perfect excuse they needed to do something they already wanted to do: massively escalate the war in Vietnam. All right, so you have this official story that seems totally rock solid. How did it all fall apart? Well, it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding process that took decades. Even when the official stories seemed completely unshakable, there were doubters right from the start. You had anti-war activists, a few sharp researchers, and even some military folks who would later become whistleblowers. But back then, their voices were totally drowned out. They were dismissed, cult conspiracy theorists or unpatriotic for even daring to ask questions. And this timeline really shows you just how long it can take for the truth to come out. I mean, look at this. The event happens in '64. The first real cracks in the story don't even start showing up until the 1970s with some investigations in Congress. But the final nail in the coffin, that didn't come until the 2000s, almost 40 years later, when the NSA and the Pentagon finally declassified the documents that proved it was all a big misinterpretation. And maybe the most damning part of all, the real smoking gun, was this. The declassified files didn't just prove the attack was a phantom, they proved that the administration knew there were serious doubts internally. They knew the reports were shaky, even as they went on national TV and sold it to the American people as a cold, hard fact. So that leads to a really big question. Why? Why did this happen? Was it just a handful of people in a room telling a calculated lie? Or was it something, I don't know, more complicated, more baked into the system itself? The reality is, it's less about a single villain and more about a perfect storm of factors. Think about it. You've got this intense Cold War paranoia, the domino theory, this fear that if Vietnam falls, all of Asia will fall to communism. You've got a massive government machine that's designed to act fast, not to sit around and debate. And you've got this political desire to avoid a long, drawn-out argument in Congress. All those things came together to create a situation where just escalating was the easiest, most natural path forward. And that's really the crucial thing to understand here. The incomplete information, the mistake, it wasn't just a mistake that was left uncorrected. It was, you could say, conveniently upgraded to a confirmed fact because it helped achieve a goal they already had. It's how a flicker on a radar screen in a storm becomes an official act of war. Something like this obviously leaves behind some deep, deep scars, but it can also trigger something almost like a democratic immune response. The system gets sick, and then it tries to build antibodies to prevent it from happening again. So let's talk about that legacy. First, let's just be clear about the consequences. They were absolutely devastating. We're talking millions of lives lost in the Vietnam War. Back in the US, it tore the country apart, creating divisions that we still feel today. And maybe just as important, it fundamentally broke the public's trust in what their government was telling them. That's a wound that you could argue has never really healed. But here's the thing. Out of that disaster, the immune system did kick in. You get the War Powers Act, which was a new law designed specifically to stop a president from having a blank check for war. Things like freedom of information requests and protections for whistleblowers suddenly seemed way more important. And the media, well, it got a massive wake-up call about the need to actually question and verify official stories. And this is really important. The Gulf of Tonkin wasn't a one-off. It's a pattern. We've seen it happen again. Just look at 2003 and the invasion of Iraq. You had flawed intelligence about WMDs, combined with the immense political pressure after 9/11, and you get the same result. It's the exact same dangerous recipe. Incomplete information plus intense political pressure equals a rush to war. So what are we supposed to take away from all of this? Look, the lesson isn't to just become a cynic and suspect everything you're told. That's not helpful. The real lesson is about being a critical thinker. It's about understanding that official announcements, especially when things are tense and scary, are not gospel. They're just claims, and they absolutely have to be questioned and checked out. And that really just leaves us with one final and kind of unsettling question to think about. This story isn't really about 1964. It's about today. It's about right now. So the question is, what's the official story that we're all hearing today that 40 years from now people are going to look back on and call their generation's Gulf of Tonkin incident?